Yo, what is going on YouTube? We're back with a live stream slash VOD slash video, whatever the hell you want to call it. We're going to be ranking all of the Pokemon mainline games. I just went into the mainline games because I feel like if I do every single game, it's probably going to take a while. Let's just take a look at our little option. Okay, well, for starters... Nah. I guess it's not important that we go in order. I'll just do them as we go. Okay. What is this? This is the original Pokemon Diamond and Pearl. Okay. The champion was great. I feel like the music in Pokemon Diamond and Pearl was also pretty good, especially compared to some of the other games. Yeah, Diamond and Pearl definitely has one of the really good soundtracks amongst Pokemon. And on top of that, the roster of new Pokemon I also felt was really great. We have options like Luxray. The starter's really good, especially Infernape and Empoleon. Torterra I didn't end up liking as much, but it's still a cool starter. We got Pokemon like Staraptor. I already said Luxray. The legendaries were all really cool. Dialga, Palkia, Giratina, and Platinum, but we're going to be rating Platinum separately, so we'll leave him out of it. Arceus was really cool. I believe the what are they called? The Weather Trio? Not Kyogre, Groudon, and Rayquaza, but Thundurus, Landorus, and Tornadus. I forgot what trio they're technically called, but they were also really cool. Swords of Justice were Gen 5. I'm thinking the wrong gen in that regard. But yeah. Overall, I think they were pretty solid games. I'll give him A tier. Pokemon Platinum. Pokemon Platinum is everything that the Diamond and Pearl games were originally, but better. I don't think it's good enough to warrant S tier. Maybe it is. Do I want to put something in S tier so early though? I don't know. This one's tough because I feel like it almost kind of deserves S tier, but I want to reserve that for the games that I think are like really the best. Matter of fact, the more I'm thinking about it, yeah, I think that's fair. I guess it'll do. Okay, Pokemon Heart Gold and Soul Silver. I'm gonna try and think of these games objectively and not like marred by nostalgia, because Heart Gold was the first Pokemon game that I ever actually played. So I don't want to be like biased in that regard. They did a lot to improve upon the features of Gen 3 while being in Gen 2. It was the only game, I believe, where we could travel to a different region. So there were 2 regions worth of content within the games themselves. It had a pretty decent sized roster, 393 Pokemon. There was no new Pokemon, however, because they're essentially just remakes of Gold and Silver. So I can't say much for the new roster of Pokemon, especially it being a game that was in Gen 3, but based in Gen 2. I think these are a solid B tier as well. The story was nothing to gawk over, but then again, it's Pokemon. One of the stories really like that. There aren't many games that the story is like actually ridiculously good. Except, however, this. And while we're at it, we can put Black 2 and White 2 up there too. These are the first Pokemon games I'm going to reserve for S tier. The story in these games are some of the best stories that Pokemon has ever done. The music was absolutely immaculate. And there's a lot of really good hitters when it comes to the new roster of Pokemon that came with Gen 5. However, I will say there are also a lot of Pokemon in the Gen 5 roster that I don't like, design-wise, competitive-wise. If you're into competitive battling, a lot of the Pokemon in Gen 5 weren't that great. Hydreigon is a great example, but like, one Pokemon doesn't make up for all of the other Pokemon that I didn't really end up liking too much, like Watchog. Funny enough, I actually like Watchog, but my initial impression of it wasn't too great until I actually played Pokemon Super Mystery Dungeon. And if you played Super Mystery Dungeon, like, Watchog is like the principal of the school. So I ended up liking Watchog more because of that, but not because of Gen 5, you know? Yeah. I think these are great spots for these games. Pokemon X and Y. All right, chat. I think that these games are heavily underrated. The story wasn't too much to speak of, though it did have some messages that was kind of like on par with the level of Black and White, but the way the story was told definitely wasn't as entertaining or fun to play through as the stories in Black and White and Black and White 2. The new roster of Pokemon, while very small, had mostly bangers. Talonflame, Greninja, the most popular Pokemon in the world at one point. But all three legendaries, X, Y, and Z. Diancie, Volcanion. Do I want to count Mega Evolutions as new Pokemon? No, I'm not going to count them as new Pokemon, but they're new forms for old Pokemon, which were only introduced in Gen 6, so I'll count all of the Megas too. Goodra is a really cool Pokemon. To me. It's one of the worst competitively, like, pseudo-legendaries, but it's a really cool Pokemon in my eyes anyway. Get off my dick. I believe, other than Gen 7, it has the single largest amount of Pokemon in the game. Like, actually in the game. It's got other really cool Pokemon too, like Noivern, Hawlucha. It introduced the fairy typing. Ooh. I feel like a lot of you are going to hate me for this. I think it's better than Platinum. I do. I said it. I think Pokemon X and Y is better than Pokemon Platinum. Fight me about it. This is my tier list. Okay, the next Pokemon entries on the game, on this, Pokemon Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. These are the Gen 3 remakes, but they were remastered in Gen 6. They added the Mega Evolutions for the starters of the Hoenn region. They added Primal Reversion forms for Kyogre and Groudon, and a Mega Evolution for Rayquaza. The Delta episode is undoubtedly one of the single best, like, Pokemon post games in all of Pokemon, bar none. It's at least a top 3 contender for me, at least. The Delta episode was so good, and the character Zinnia and her backstory and everything. It's so. If you haven't played it, go take a look at it. Lore Keeper Zinnia has some of the greatest lore in Pokemon history. And oh, if you've read the Pokemon manga, well, that gets even crazier. That gets even crazier. But how would I rate this game? An S tier, easily. It's better than Pokemon Black and White. And I know a lot of people in my generation, like, we started out and grew up with Gen 5, so I feel like that's a lot of the reason that we rate it so highly. I don't rate it as high as some of my other peers. I do think the games are very good for Pokemon games. And by the way, these are by standards of Pokemon games, not games in general. Because if they were like games in general, I don't think any Pokemon game is really above like an A tier. And if there are Pokemon games that are above A tier, it would be, to me, the only Pokemon games that would be like above A tier and would make it to an actual S tier in terms of like gaming in general would be the next games we're about to mention, actually, Pokemon Sun and Moon and Pokemon Ultra Sun, Ultra Moon. I think the story in Ultra Sun, Ultra Moon is slightly worse, but the features that they added make up for it, so I think it's a bit better. Now, I could go on for hours and hours about why these are my favorite Pokemon games, and I know that the fan base is very split when it comes to these. But I feel like they branched off into a new way for Pokemon and did the island trials instead of the typical gyms. I thought it was a organic and new change. I thought it was a great change. I actually prefer the island challenge over the gyms. The new roster of Pokemon, I don't think there's a single Pokemon in the Gen 7 roster that I dislike outside of Crabominable. And we have options like Como, Lycanroc, Rockruff, all three of the starters. And if we're gonna talk about the competitive viability of some of the Pokemon, Alolan Ninetales is really great with the Snow Warning, Aurora Veil setup, especially in double battles. It's one of my It is like actually just my staple on every team I use. Like since the Sun and Moon generation, I've always had one on my team. There were of course Megas and Z moves in the game. So it had the most features, like the most gimmicks and features out of any other Pokemon game. It had the biggest roster of Pokemon in any Pokemon game. The legendaries, Solgaleo is my favorite legendary, if you guys didn't know. I might have mentioned it a couple of times on the channel, but yeah, Solgaleo is 100% my favorite legendary. The story arc of Nebby, like sacrificing itself to save Lily, and then Lily taking it to all four of the different islands, trying to find out a way to get it back home, and then the reveal that it was actually the legendary Pokemon of the game the whole time. Pokemon hadn't done that before, and that shit was so sick to me, dog. These are the best Pokemon games. But as far as the other hitters go, competitively, there is the big cat in the room that shall not be named, Incineroar, probably the greatest competitive Pokemon of all time. Fire Dark type, great offensive and defensive typing. It has really good bulk. It has access to moves like Fake Out, U-Turn. It has the ability Intimidate, and in recent gens it also got buffed by giving him Parting Shot. So Incineroar just kept getting even crazier and crazier. And back in Gen 7, it was one of the strongest Pokemon ever. Probably the strongest Pokemon ever competitively. Maybe outside of like Zacian or Mega Rayquaza. In terms of how it peaked, how strong it was. But then again, competitive is a completely different format, because in the competitive format, you run doubles, and when talking about super powerful Pokemon like Mega Rayquaza, Zacian, Ultra Necrozma, the thing is about them that they are allowed in a lot less formats, and the only format that they are allowed in is restricted, where you can only bring 1 to 2 legendary Pokemon, which means you can only have one super powerful Pokemon on your team, and oftentimes because of that, they end up getting checked by the other power balancers, because there are other super powerful legendary Pokemon with absurd stats. One of the reasons Mega Rayquaza was able to run rampant was because it could Mega Evolve and have those stats, but still hold any choice of its held item. And Ultra Necrozma, it had a really extensive move pool with Neuroforce, so it was hitting for super effective damage a lot of the time. And that super effective damage would be boosted by its ability, and it had access to a Z move, so it was kind of like Mega Evolving and having a Z move at the same time. Plus, Duskmane is just one of the strongest legendary Pokemon ever, with its amazing Psychic Steel typing and Prism Armor, which lets it take less damage and has time to set up, especially depending on what type of strategy you're going for. And Ultra Necrozma itself is super fast. It has base 129 speed, outspeeds most of the metagame. My other notable Pokemon that were like good competitively, Toxapex. Ho-Oh not so much into the later generations. Well, I suppose it did pretty good when it had access to its signature Z move. But then again, if you use that, you were giving up access to another Z move. So it was solid. It was solid. And then the singles metagame is also different than the competitive format, so that's a different story. But either way, we need to move on. Let's go Pikachu and Eevee. This game was bad. I didn't enjoy it. I enjoyed being able to like play it with my cousin and whatnot. But outside of that, it's just a Gen 1 rehash with Megas and a very short roster of Pokemon. This is just a worse version of this. Let's be real. I know there are a lot of Gen 1ers out there, but when it comes to comparing it to other Pokemon games, yeah, it has the respect that it started it all, but these were not very good Pokemon games. There wasn't much of a story to speak with. The rivals weren't that great. Oh my gosh. Matter of fact, I need to go back and talk about some of the rivals for some of these games. The rivals in Pokemon Black and White, Hugh was one of the best rivals ever. I enjoyed his story arc. Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire has what is probably my favorite rival of all time in Wally. I'm kind of a sucker for the whole underdog type of story. And Wally was definitely the underdog of the story. He was super weak and sickly at the start of the story, but by the end, he pulls up and he's like a true rival for the main character. And then when it comes to Sun and Moon, oh my goodness, Gladion. How his story ties into like Lily's being her brother and all, and the whole, I don't know if they have last names, but that whole family tree, that was such a good story arc in Sun and Moon. And I believe that Sun and Moon has the best story in any Pokemon games. Yes, even over Black and White. Hao was one of my favorite rivals too. I enjoyed his upbeat nature. And in Sword and Shield, when they tried to redo him in a Hop, it's like they made Hao again, but then made him a really annoying character compared to what he was in the first games. And that's what developed Hop. And that's why I ended up not liking Hop that much. Speaking of Sword and Shield, they're here. Now, a lot of people don't like this game because of the National Dex thing, but we got to give it props where props are due. Marnie was a cool rival, so was Bede. It was the first time in a while that we had like a jerk rival. And what else should I say about this? Like the wild area, it had its flaws, but it was a big step for Pokemon too, in terms of getting to where it potentially could be today. We're gonna see what this Pokemon Legends ZA looks like. Hopefully it's an amazing Pokemon game, because after the abominations that were Scarlet and Violet, I will not be buying another Pokemon game unless I see that they're really stepping it up and making the Pokemon games a lot better than they should. Because it doesn't make sense to me how a lot of the 3DS era games are way better than the Nintendo Switch era games, and they have so much more to work with now than they did on the DS and 3DS. But all that being said, I enjoyed the DLC for Sword and Shield. It was a fun little DLC. I enjoyed the competitive aspects of Sword and Shield with like the new Pokemon they added, but I didn't enjoy Dynamax as much. I felt like that was pretty broken and overtuned. But I'd give Sword and Shield a B. Above Diamond and Pearl? Below Platinum? Yeah. I'll give it top of B. Okay, Pokemon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl. It is the exact same game as Pokemon Diamond and Pearl, but brand new and chibi, so for that, it is garbage. Probably the worst Pokemon game ever released. You did Gen 4... We wanted Gen 4 remakes, but we weren't expecting you to do Gen 4 remade. You know? Nothing new came out of it. Absolute waste. Absolute money grab. Pokemon Legends Arceus. Now this one is really hard for me to rate because I've seen a lot of playthroughs and I've watched like my other friends play the game, but I've never actually played the game myself. So I'm going to have to put it here, but based on what I've seen on Legends of Arceus, It's one of the best Pokemon games out there. I'd have to give it an S tier, but because of a technicality, I do have to put it in haven't played. Okay, Pokemon Yellow, Pokemon. It's red and green, but with Pikachu. Congrats. Pokemon Gold and Silver. These were okay, and for that matter, so was Crystal. Just okay Pokemon games. I do give it props that in Gold and Silver you could still travel to the Kanto region, and that was a feature that they really should bring back. But the games themselves are not much to speak of. Okay, Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire version, they are just significantly worse versions of Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. I don't care what your nostalgia says, it's not anywhere near as good as these. And I'm even biased towards Gen 3, but I can't give it more than a B. Because, and then I suppose it's just in the nature of older games. They're not going to be as advanced as the newer games, but they didn't have even half the amount of Pokemon that Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire had. The new roster of Pokemon has some of my favorite Pokemon ever. For example, Blaziken is my favorite Pokemon in the world, and that comes out of the original Gen 3 games. Competitive aspect, well, I don't think competitive was really too big back in the Ruby and Sapphire days. I don't think competitive Pokemon really started becoming really a thing until sometime around Platinum, I believe. That's where people started really playing Pokemon competitively a lot. And I know it started really taking off in Gen 5 too. No, yeah. Solid games, but not Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire. Pokemon Coliseum, this one has some of the best animations in Pokemon. For that alone, the amount of work put into the game compared to other Pokemon games, I feel like I have to give it an A tier. Pokemon Coliseum was pretty good. Fire Red and Leaf Green. Now these are much better than the other Gen 1 games. But still, in the context of other Pokemon games, they're not all that. I'm going to have to give it a... it's too low. I think it's right there with Heart Gold and Soul Silver. Pokemon Emerald version. Better versions of Ruby and Sapphire. And they changed up the story. I really liked that the story had evolved and then Wallace was the champion at the end, replacing Steven. And then adding in the storyline of Rayquaza, one of the greatest legendary Pokemon of all time. And I think that's a pretty unanimous opinion. I'll give Pokemon Emerald an A tier. Above Coliseum, above Platinum, above X and Y. Now, Pokemon XD, Shadow Lugia is such a crazy design, but I've never played this game or even seen gameplay on it. Well, I have seen gameplay on it, but very brief. And now the final mainline games in the series. Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, they were released as buggy messes. They downgraded from the animations that were in Sword and Shield. But the story was very enjoyable to me. I love Arven's character arc. Penny is not that important of a character to me, but she still has her charm. And then Nimona is probably either my second favorite or tied with Wally as my favorite rival, because she's really just like a rival, you know. She's always competing with you, trying to get you to be your best version of yourself so that she can have a better challenge out of you later. And then like in the battles that you guys do, canonically, she actually takes wins upon the main character occasionally, and that's so sick to me. Because like in the Blueberry Academy DLC, you'll fight her, and then if you lose to her, she'll be like, "That's another win for me, friend." Tomaya, or whatever her catchphrase is. With the addition of the DLC, and oh man, speaking of the DLC, Kieran is also one of the coolest characters in Pokemon. Absolutely, just a powerhouse. And like I have a thing for the underdog kind of story, so Kieran ended up being one of my favorite characters and rivals. I think in terms of characterization, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet have the single best roster of characters all around. If there is a game that has better characters overall, it would be Sun and Moon. Because of the Kahunas, Kukui himself, and Lily is the best character in Pokemon. I don't give a fuck what anyone else says. Scarlet and Violet deserves B tier right there with Sword and Shield, because it does some things better than Sword and Shield, but some things worse. I think it's slightly better, but because of all the bugs that it came out with, it was a buggy mess that oftentimes you would get soft locked in. Sometimes, like my first experience to Scarlet and Violet, I didn't really experience any of that, but after playing the game more, than stuff like that started to happen. And then the downgrade in the quality of animations, and then the roster of new Pokemon. While a lot of them are incredible competitively, I was not interested in a lot of the new designs. I was super interested in Tinkaton, and it has a great design and everything, but it ended up being overwhelming to like use. Because I was hoping for it to be super strong, but it's not. But then again, I guess they had to hold back on another Fairy and Steel type because of Zacian. One of the reasons Zacian was so busted was because of its Fairy Steel typing. Fucking 8 resistances, 2 weaknesses, and 2 immunities. Come on now. That is a broken typing. But yeah, I think that will do it for my mainline Pokemon tier list. I'm happy with this tier list. I'm certain a lot of people are going to disagree with it, but let me know in the comments down below what you guys think. Tell me what your favorite Pokemon games are. And perhaps we can do a Pokemon side game tier list too. Because I've played a lot of the Pokemon side games as well. Super Mystery Dungeon, Pokemon Snap. But yeah, that's going to do it for this video / live stream. And I'll see you guys in the next one. I'm going to end the live stream now. Bye.